Good morning. Time now a minute after 8 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo, Friday, January 14th, 2022. Welcome to the very first edition of the year of the World Bank Tokyo online morning seminar organized by the World Bank Tokyo office. My name is Koichi Omori. I am Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. This morning, we are featuring a new report titled From Jobs to Careers, Apparel Export and Career Paths for Women in Developing Countries. Connecting from Washington and Texas, we have three experts, and let me introduce each one of them very briefly. First, we have Gladys Lopez Acevedo, the lead economist and global lead poverty and global lead in the poverty and equity global practice of the World Bank. Previously, she was lead economist in the Office of Chief Economist for South Asia, where I met with her for the first time. And she was a senior economist also in the Central Vice Presidency of the Poverty Reduction and Economic Management. Before joining the World Bank, she was with the government of Mexico, holding high-level positions, and a professor at the Mexico Autonomous Institute of Technology. Gladys, good evening to you. Thanks for joining. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Koichi. Happy New Year.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome back to our program. Second, we have Raymond Robertson. Raymond is a professor and the Helen Roy Liu Chair in Economics and Department in the Economics and Government in the Department of International Affairs, Bush School of Government and Public Services at Texas A&M University. She is a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics in Bonn and the senior research fellow at the Mission Foods Texas Mexico Center at Southern Methodist University. He previously chaired the U.S. Department of Labor's National Advisory Committee for Labor Provisions of U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Welcome to our program, joining from the Texas, the Raymond. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much, Koichi, for the wonderful introduction.
Great, thank you very much. And we have Mexico Vergara. Mexico is a consultant at the World Bank's Poverty and Equity Global Practice. Mexico has been working on the female labor participation and distributional effect of the trade in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia regions. Previously, he worked at the economist at the International Economic Division of the Bank of Mexico. Welcome to our program, Mexico. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Koichi, and thank you for inviting us here.
Super, great, thank you. So we'll listen to a keynote presentation by Gladys and Raymond for the next 30-40 minutes, sharing the main point of the report. After their presentation, I'll read your question sent in advance. And please send more questions if you have using online form posted on the announcement page of our seminar, or you can simply post your question on the chat section on the YouTube screen. I'll read your question asking Gladys, Raymond, and Mexico to respond after the keynote presentation. We'd like to ask Gladys and Raymond to start your keynote presentation. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koichi, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be able to present our work. As you know, this is a work that really started when I was working with Raymond in South Asia, and we were thinking we did several reports, as you know, in terms of trade and exports. Something that was particularly important to us is how to advance women's economic opportunities. And as we know, labor market is a key vehicle for women to be able to develop and contribute to economic development. So based on this motivation, I'm thinking we started drafting or working in this report, and I wanted here to acknowledge also other colleagues, Stacy, who also contributed and led a lot of this work. And our thinking was to try to understand women's engagement in the labor force, that this is critical for economic development. And what we have seen is that across the world, improving or integrating women, such as in the apparel sector, into international trade has helped to increase female labor force participation. This is something we demonstrated in a previous publication with Raymond in the case of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. But also we realized that not all type of engagement in the labor market is the same. So therefore, the scope of this or the goal of this report was had to focus. First, shift the debate and thinking not just around jobs, but also through long-term what is called careers. And this is very important because maybe this is a concept that is it's better known in United States. The recent publication of Claudia Goldwyn on Quiet Revolution, and she studies United States for 10 or 20 years and sees how is that women labor force participation has developed and has gone from just traditional jobs into what is called a career. And we realized that this type of analysis had not been done in developing countries, this quiet revolution. So the first contribution that we are trying to do in this report is to apply this quiet revolution concept into what it means in developing countries and for different set of countries. The second objective of this report, because also the background, as you know, we have had on, is to try to understand whether apparel or labor-intensive type of activities are a vehicle in order to advance women's career from jobs to career. So these two things. The first is to understand the quiet revolution in developing countries, and the second is to understand whether apparel has been able to advance in this process. And when we were crafting this report, we were reading a lot of background documents, and it has been documented, not only the publications that we have carried out with Raymond, but others also, that apparel exporting create jobs. But we want to focus on whether does it lead to better employment opportunities, what is called careers, and so how is that this is done. And we realized that there has been lack of research, particular research, looking at these questions and providing a specific analysis and guidance in terms of next steps in which female labor participation can be encouraged through global value chains and specific apparel or export-oriented production. Next. Here we are not alone in this quest. No, I mean there are a lot of other institutions that are already thinking or taking the next steps. ILO through the IFC Better Work Program. And so the key research questions that we are trying to address in this report is, how can we help realize the full potential of women in the economy? As what role does apparel exporting plays in this transition from jobs to careers? And also, very importantly, what are the metrics or what is the analytics to understand how to help women in this transition from jobs to careers? And this is very interesting because also motivated only from our own research, but other research in terms of the well-known shape between female labor participation and GDP, and it's that as countries, low-income in low-income countries, female labor force participation tends to be very high, in agriculture. As countries move into development, the labor force participation declines, but then they, in high-income countries like the United States or other developing countries, labor force participation of women is high. But interestingly, what this graph also shows is that there is a lot of heterogeneity, and heterogeneity among the countries that are the focus of this study. Most of them are countries with an important share of apparel exports. And we wanted to understand precisely this variation in this study, and the report provides a specific analysis and also recommendations in terms of what has happened with respect to this quiet revolution in these countries and what are the metrics. So now I turn to Professor Raymond, who will provide more insights into this transition from jobs to careers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gladys, for doing such a nice job of setting the stage. And thank you again to the organizers for having us to present today this important work. One of the notable features of the path from jobs to careers is that it is a very clearly delineated path, at least it had been in the United States, where women start off at low, when income is very low, we start off with informal work and agriculture. And then when countries industrialize, they transition into factory work. And that involves some increase in jobs, basically in factories. And then as countries go through additional economic development, oftentimes they'll transition into mid-skill services and then finally into higher skilled occupations. The main difference here is you see the jobs are sort of shaded lightly and then the careers are darker, is that one of the key differences between jobs and careers is this sense of identity that comes with your occupation in the labor market. And that having an identity of saying, I am a teacher, I am a social worker, I am a president or whatever, involves a consummate or a matching investment in a long run view of participation in the labor market. And having that long run view facilitates training and industry specific skills and firm specific skills, which then increase productivity and then contribute to development. So this transition is not only notable or had been notable in the United States, but it has very real economic impact. And that's one of the main reasons why we think it's important to think about this transition from jobs to careers from the point of view of economic development. So in this report, we present our results in 5 chapters, right? We first begin with explaining that distinction between jobs and careers and why that's important. Then in chapter 2, we look at apparel exporting countries to explore whether or not apparel exports support this quiet revolution of women moving from jobs to careers. Then in chapter 3, we explore 3 critical barriers to career development. What is standing in the way of countries, or women particularly in these countries, to make that transition from jobs to careers? Then in chapter 4, we combine these 2 ideas to see how the apparel export strategy might fit into that jobs to careers transition. And then finally, we look at policy recommendations in the last chapter. So we're going to present a little bit of a summary of each of these chapters rather than presenting the entire thing. We would like to encourage you to read the report and download the report, and obviously follow up with us either in this session or later on if you have questions. But for chapter 1, we begin by defining jobs versus careers. And as I mentioned, that jobs are something that you would do in the labor force just because you have to earn some money. So you need to earn some money, whether it's to eat or whether, just to provide a minimum standard of living for your family. But it's something that if your income were to go up in other ways, you would leave that job and definitely spend time doing something else. Careers, on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, are tied to identity. They're tied to a long run view of the labor market, and they are also tied with significant investment in skills that would increase productivity. So the way we begin, obviously, is reviewing the academic literature, and we rely heavily on Claudia Golden's work, as Gladys has already explained. That empirical work that she had done, and others, of course, who had followed her, illustrates that transition from jobs to careers within sort of this canonical intertemporal household labor supply model, in which households make a decision about how much the different people within the household, say the husband and the wife, are going to engage in the labor market. And that provides a theoretical foundation for these transition indicators that we explore empirically. And then we're going to explore a little bit the potential development effects in the economy, again, linking that back to productivity. Then in chapter 2, we look at these 5 different measures for 7 critical apparel exporting countries. So when you think about how do we measure the difference between jobs and careers, or that transition, we rely on the previous literature and identify 5 critical measures. One is investment in human capital. So how long do particularly women stay in school relative to men? Secondly, we look at earnings gaps. So what is the male-female wage differential, and how is that different across industries and occupations? Third, we look at lifetime labor force participation. So do people drop out of the labor force, maybe to raise children, or maybe to pursue other interests, or maybe you get married and your spouse is earning enough so that you don't feel you have to take a job? So we explore that. And then the fourth one is the distribution of employment. And we look at the distribution of employment across occupation and industries because, as I'm sure most of you are aware, there still is significant gender segregation in different industries and occupations. And this actually has an important role to play in that transition from jobs to careers. And then we also look at the labor force participation of married women. In particular, what happens when people get married? Do they drop out of the labor force, or do they stay in the labor force? That's different from lifetime labor force participation, because lifetime labor force participation follows people at all ages. So long after that initial marriage decision, do you stay in the labor market? So we evaluate each of these indicators for these different countries, and we find that the countries actually vary a lot in terms of their transition along this path. We see that a number of countries are actually behind other countries based on those indicators. So that suggests that there might be some significant barriers to career development. So in chapter 3, we explore the barriers to career development. The first one that we focus on is the low demand for services due to insufficient national income. And what this means is that traditionally, actually, interestingly, in most countries, there are industries that women typically concentrate in. And a lot of those in the developed countries are ones that we often associate with careers. So these are the more advanced services. In some degrees. And in many developing countries, the income levels are low, which means that they have insufficient demand for the types of services that women would be concentrating in if they had those opportunities. So that's in more of the developed countries. In the developing countries, of course, we still see a lot of concentration of agriculture, and women still primarily work in agriculture, because in agrarian societies, everyone really has to work. When we do see women falling out of the labor force is during this industry transition, the industrial period, because males tend to dominate industrial production. And so when countries make that transition from agriculture into industry, we see men tend to dominate, and women at that case might drop out because the jobs that might be more typically associated for women are just simply not as prevalent. We can go to the next one. The next one, of course, is low educational levels. And here we're talking about the supply of education more than the demand, because we see in lots of developing countries, educational opportunities for women are still somewhat restricted for a number of different reasons. So when you look at the share of workers with at least upper secondary education by gender, these lower income countries tend to, especially Pakistan, Cambodia, and Bangladesh, still have relatively low education levels for women. And because a long-term investment in the labor market, like careers, are often associated with higher levels of education, this is one of the barriers that women face. They can't get the education they might need in order to invest in a career. Now, you'll notice, though, there are some countries that is not the case, right? That some countries have very high levels of education, whether it's Turkey, Sri Lanka, and Egypt. And so the heterogeneity was something that we focus a lot on in the report. Next. So the third barrier are these cultural and societal norms, which is something that economists in particular are very hesitant to discuss. But in the last several years in the literature, we do see more and more articles and reports focusing on these cultural and societal norms, right? So, and this speaks to that occupational and industrial segregation that I mentioned earlier. We think of in many countries that these jobs simply are not for women. And that is something that holds women back because it affects their perspective on where they're going to invest and be successful. But it also affects men's attitudes in terms of giving women the opportunity to compete and produce in these industries. And you see, obviously, that there are some factors which are more strongly associated with that than others. In some of the countries noted here, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Egypt, you also see a lot of resistance for women to be fully participating in the labor market, largely due to these cultural norms, which in many cases can be tied to religion. So in the sense that this is still an important barrier, and now that we're able to talk about this more, it's important to recognize those types of societal norms as barriers. So trying to break through those by demonstrating other opportunities and the productivity of women and the benefits of the productivity of women to society is actually something that might really help promote economic development. So then we move on to chapter 4 by tying these ideas together and applying them specifically to apparel. And we look at the growth of apparel exports in these apparel exporting countries. And we try to relate this to how the jobs to careers transition is being affected by increases in apparel exports. So in order to understand that, it's important to understand how apparel exporting is structured. It's mainly structured through these global value chains. That's the GVC up at the top. So the relationships of GVC activities and country roles are varied based on occupational skill and country income levels. So lower income countries are still primarily focused on sewing, cutting, and some of the more manual parts of labor versus the more advanced technologies that we find in developed countries or high income countries, which might be more focused on R&D and marketing. So that we've seen that the entrance of, or the expansion of apparel exports in these low wage countries does create jobs. It creates the type of assembly work in basically light industry in the apparel factories. But we find that that is not necessarily conducive to creating career paths. So there's a number of barriers that women apparel workers face, which basically inhibit their ability to make that transition from thinking of being a sewer in particular, or shifting into a longer run career. So obviously that's not hard and fast. Some women definitely consider being a seamstress or working in the garment factory as a career. They think about doing this for the long run and they like doing it and they feel that there's an identity to that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That makes sense. But that's usually not the way most women think about the apparel work. So in some cases, the apparel work might be encouraging, give women formal sector experience, and then lead them to consider longer run engagement in the formal sector, which is an indicator of economic development. But a lot of those other barriers that we discussed in chapter 3 still are preventing them from making that full transition from jobs to careers. So this is actually a little bit discouraging in the sense that the apparel exports are creating jobs, but they're kind of limited in their ability to lead to the career growth. So what do we do about that, right? Well, do we just stop exporting apparel? Absolutely not, because the apparel exports are still creating jobs, they're creating employment, they're creating income. And so that's actually important. But I think what we're trying to do with this report is change the paradigm of how we think about women's employment in developing countries. We need to stop thinking about just promoting jobs, but start really thinking about how do we get people, men and women, to think about careers and long-run engagement in the labor force. How do we do that? Well, we have a number of policy recommendations. Number one, we do think it's important to continue to increase the participation of female production workers in export-oriented manufacturing. We are getting a foot in the door, as it were, with those exports. But also, even within the apparel sector, finding ways to increase the number of female supervisors and upgrading jobs within apparel would help women increase productivity and training and increase their productivity as a way to help them realize their full potential as a long-run career path. A third one, of course, is increasing access to education and promoting female participation in career training specifically. This would require increased upper secondary enrollment, reducing information gaps, but mainly just trying to use role models or helping women think about new ways of labor market engagement that were non-traditional. To let them break out of maybe those glass ceilings, which is the next one, right? There are some significant legal barriers and work practices that still hold women back from thinking about pursuing promotions and opening their own businesses and that sort of thing. But also, I think foreign support can play a significant role in that. Given the predominance of the multinational corporations and the lead firms and the buyers in these developing countries, they are in a very good position to start engaging with modeling and career mentoring. We've seen some of this with the We Connect program in Pakistan, through the U.S.-Pakistan Women's Council has facilitated that, and other types of initiatives like that might be incredibly successful as we're moving forward. So those are the main policy recommendations, and we really appreciate your time, and we look forward to the discussion. The last point, of course, is that we're trying to increase that probability that women are going to enter this labor market and that apparel exporting countries will foster the environments that facilitate this career development. So in order to do that, we want to start thinking about the long run, think about investing in skills, think about moving into better paid, life-fulfilling occupations in order to really make this transition. With some of the barriers we've identified, it allows policymakers to provide focus to what to do next. And we hope then that this will start by changing the discussion and start this quiet revolution throughout the developing countries. That's it. Thank you all very much, and we look forward again to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gladys-san. Yes, please.
No. To show also the link to download the report, I think it was at the end. We have a dedicated page to this, the landing page with the report, the background papers, data, blogs, and videos. So we encourage the audience to please take a look and also provide us with feedback. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much once again, Gladys and Raymond, for your keynote presentation, giving us a snapshot of the report. We received several questions from our audience in advance, and let me read those questions and asking you to respond. And from here, I understand Mexico will also join the conversation. First question from Sasaki-san. Thank you for your question, as always. Let me read his question. How would you evaluate the current World Bank lending programs from the viewpoint of the report analysis? Do the World Bank programs offer support to developing countries to stimulate career building for women not just increasing number of jobs? If so, do you have examples? Probably Gladys may wants to come in to respond to this one.
Thank you, Koichi. It's a great question, because precisely this report was funded by the Regional Integration Unit in South Asia. And as you know, it's an important component is how to empower women. So the bank is together with donors trying to identify ways in terms of how to empower women. And I think, you know, this contribution, this was quite novel. I think we did, frankly, with the colleagues, a breakthrough, because this concept of quiet revolution is still new for the bank, no? I think this is the first dedicated report that tries to make this case. We have had several, we had a very good launching of the report. It was precisely on the 50 years of Bangladesh. And it called a lot of attention, and we received a lot of questions and follow-up, because countries are really thinking on, okay, how can we support women? How can we help them to go from what precisely Raymond said, you know, initial tasks in the apparel industry into become floor managers in terms of advancing their career opportunities. Bangladesh is very keen. In the conference, we got requests from you know, donors in terms of thinking that. But certainly that's something also our chief economist has to start doing the dissemination with the countries, and, you know, try to encourage the thinking towards moving from jobs to careers. So that's where we are now.
Thank you, Gladys, for responding to the question. Next question from Mori-san. Thank you for your question. The willingness of the corporate executives seems one of the key elements to improve the working environment of women, among other things. What will be the best way to push the CEOs to make progress in this regard? Can you can anything be done, like by responsibly from the consumer side? So that's the question. So anyone?
Yes. No. I think because Raymond and I were engaged. Remember Raymond at the previous with Elevate. I mean, with several initiatives which, you know, try to which have this corporate responsibility, which respond to consumer demand, with to consumer you know, interest or keen in terms of seeing a change within, you know, labor intensive industries, apparel or others, electronics. And there are a number of institutions working with CEOs. I remember we went to New York. They organized a very interesting meeting there, where there were a lot of CEOs from leading companies, you know, who represent large shares of and so they were very keen to and open to engage in terms of how to change the conditions in order to improve the working conditions in apparel, and work with, you know, the bank, which is Better Work, and other think tanks, of course.
Yeah, may I add to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so a couple things that have become evident, especially over the last decade, is having women in the boardroom and in the C-suite, as they say, in the leadership role in companies, actually is important, because firms with women in those leadership positions perform better. So having a more diverse board and leadership team actually improves the performance of firms. That's been pretty clear. So corporate executives, I think, are realizing that, because they're interested in profits and they want to maximize profits, and they're starting to realize that the diversity is something that can contribute to profits. So once you see more women in those roles, that provides a very important sort of mentoring or an example for other workers, and that opens it up. So yeah, we do think that CEOs have a financial incentive to start increasing diversity. Secondly, there is a lot of pressure worldwide on addressing the concerns of women, because even at the production level, uh, the productivity of women is a key element in economic development. So investing in women is also something that leads to economic development. So how do we push CEOs to make this transition? Well, I think the next part of the question is very relevant, right? There is a consumer push that if consumers let firms know that they really do care about gender equity, they're going to respond. And I know that I have personally been working with a number of multinational apparel firms, and they are very sensitive to what they perceive to be consumer attitudes and preferences. And so they respond to things like concerns about equity and concerns about pay and concerns about overtime. So I think that consumers still can play a very significant role in trying to voice the opinion for promoting gender equity and promoting careers for women. And that would be a very effective way, I think, to help women in developing countries.
Thank you very much for responding to that question. We received several questions from the same anonymous participant. Thank you very much for sending your question as always. Let me read your question. I may not understand enough of a model for household labor supply decisions. Could you let me know why time spent in household production is defined as domestic work and leisure in the same classification? So probably should ask Raymond to respond to this question.
Sure. So going back to Gary Becker, who's one of the fathers of modern microeconomics, he developed this model of household labor supply. And he basically originally divided up labor into two parts, right? There's leisure, which is anything you do that you don't get paid for. And then there's, formal employment or work. So there's work in the labor market, and then there's everything else. So there's a long history in economics of conflating time spent in household production and domestic work. Some of the very exciting recent theoretical advances, however, show the importance of making the distinction between what we might call leisure and domestic production, because there's a certain number of things that have to be done in the house in order to maintain the household. There has to be cleaning, there has to be cooking, there has to be shopping, there has to be a number, childcare. So trying to separate out the differences between what you do for leisure, just as like relaxing time, and household production is an important question. And I'm really glad that your anonymous participant asked that question. So we start by conflating those two as well, because that is the tradition in economics. But the whole point of our paper is to drive the distinction between those two, right? Is to say that people are importantly engaged in household production. That doesn't necessarily have to be something done by the woman, right? The man or the woman could be engaged, theoretically, could be engaged in that work. And the household has to decide who's going to be engaging in household production. And how do households make that decision? They're going to compare the returns to working outside the home, which is usually the difference in wages between the men and the women, and the relative productivity inside the home. And so once we compare those two, that's how households make this allocation of work. This is why a lot of times lower wages for women lead to women doing more housework at home, because they're getting less pay in the labor market. So when households have to specialize because it's optimal, they usually end up giving up the women's wages, which happen to be lower. Our point that we're trying to make is that once women make this transition from jobs to careers, that distinction, that allocation breaks down, and we start seeing a much more equitable, slightly more equitable, not much more, but we see a more equitable distribution even in the household side. And so that transition from from jobs to careers represents a revaluation of the value of the work in the home and who's going to do that. So having women engaged in a career means now instead of doing the cleaning yourself, instead of working, you can go into the labor market and you can earn money, and then you can hire someone to do those household tasks, so that both people are more likely to engage in the labor market full time when the family thinks about careers for both spouses. So that's what the model is trying to get at. And if there are other questions about the model, I would love to elaborate on that some more.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for your responses. Let me continue with two more questions together from the same the anonymous participant. Could you evaluate in explaining the contribution of the career path for women on the issues of global value chain, international division of labor, and middle income trap? And then same person continue asking, what do you think of the influence of the analysis if the population of structural change, both natural shift and migration, is considered? So these are the questions from the same participant. So probably Raymond or Gladys, would you please respond? Thank you.
If I may, I would like to start answering the first question. So over the last decade, global value chains have provided opportunities for low-income countries and middle-income countries to produce different goods for higher-income countries, apparel and textile products being an example. Thus, it has boosted employment in these countries. However, as Raymond has actually mentioned this before in the presentation, participation in the GVCs, at least in the apparel industry, is very limited for lower income countries, and that's mainly because workers are stuck into low value added occupations, activities, specifically manufacturing. So there's little room for improvement within the apparel industry. Most of the supervisory and managerial occupations in the countries that we studied in the apparel industry are usually occupied, for example, by expats. And but like also, it has been mentioned before, this is not the worst news ever, because the first step of development is getting women into the labor market. So the apparel industry can help countries create formal jobs specifically for women, and along the way, countries can also implement different policies, such as an increase in educational access to help women start climbing up the ladder and get in supervisory and middle and higher skilled occupations in the apparel industry and in all the industries actually. So I would say that that's part of the first question, answering how the division in labor in GBCs, specifically for the apparel industry, helps countries move from lower to higher income economies. And the second question, Koichi, would you mind repeating it, please?
Sure. Second part of the question, what do you think of the influence of the analysis if the population structure change, both natural shift and migration, is considered? That's the question as I was reading.
Do you want me to answer that one, Mexico, or I could?
Oh, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. We need a system for deciding who's going to go next. Yeah. So one of the things about that actually Mexico I just mentioned was that in a lot of countries, look at Jordan, for example, a lot of the apparel production is done by migrants. So when migrants come in, migrants actually engage in the labor force in a very different way. So one of the other papers I'm working on looks at how migrants incorporate into a labor market. And one of the things that is increasingly recognized as important are sort of these social skills or cultural skills. And new migrants often have less of those familiarity with the native culture. And so they tend to gravitate towards more manual labor rather than those service things. So in some cases, right, we would see that the migrants are the ones who are going to fill in a lot of the types of apparel jobs, and that creates competition for women, which means it's even more important to open up the opportunities for women, because basically, we've seen this in the United States in a couple of recent papers in the AER and some other papers, that when the migrants come in, they actually create competition at the lowest ends, especially low-wage migrants. They create competition at the low end of the distribution, and that pushes natives to get more training and to invest more, because that competition is going to be fierce at the lower end. And so migration could be actually, in that sense, another push to get women into careers or moving in that direction. But that's only going to work if those barriers are not there. So if those barriers remain, the competition for migrants come in, it's pushing women up, but they're stuck against that barrier and they're not able to make that transition. And that's why one of the other reasons why we believe that changing the paradigm of how we think about employment in developing countries from job to careers is really so important.
Okay, thank you very much. We received several questions posted on the YouTube chat section related to quiet revolution. So let me read those 3 points raised by the participant, and I'll ask you to make comment. Two comments from Satoko-san. What should educational institutions do in order to promote quiet revolution? And then Satoko-san continue asking, is there any country like a role model of the quiet revolution? And then Professor Shimamoto from Kyoto asking, why parallel segment per se, and why export-related segment likewise? Any other sectors deemed structural, instrumental for the quiet revolution? So these are the points raised related to the quiet revolutions. I would like to ask the speakers to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll address the first one. Yeah, so as we have mentioned, social norms may limit expectations, right? And that's how on how women plan or invest in, for example, education, and how long they're going to stay in the labor market, for example. Therefore, education institutions have a huge role on helping women transition from jobs to careers. Two ideas that we explore in the report, and we have several more there, so we invite you to take a look at the report, are first of all, providing more information, reducing the information gaps about earning, different occupations, for example, or even degrees needed for supervisory and management occupations in the apparel industry, and indeed in every industry. For example, just in the case of apparel industry, management positions usually require to have a degree in textile engineering or production management or a master in business administration, etc. But these degrees are usually more popular between male workers, as women usually go to design and stitching and fashion design courses. So in a sense, reducing this information gap, it's one important approach that educational institutions can take. And also, for example, inviting different role models or women that are already in the industry can help a lot. And we also mentioned this because what we find also and we discuss in the report, is that women tend to have smaller professional, formal or informal networks in order to enter the labor market or to be promoted in the same industry. So creating these opportunities to meet other women that are already in the industry and have more experience on this career job pathways, it's also an important option for schools to involve in this transition from jobs to careers.
The other question, in terms of the other question in terms of whether it's exports I mean, there were two other questions. No, if there is a role model in terms of country, and then whether it's only manufacturing the way. And I think the book at the beginning tries to picture how is the development takes place. No, I mean, first is from services to from agriculture to manufacturing and services. Because of the type of countries on which we were are part of the study, we focus on those that were making the transition from agriculture to manufacturing, which is the usual route of development. Nowadays, we see, and that's what we see, for instance, in the MENA and other countries, is that there is this transition from agriculture to services. But independently of whether it's manufacturing or services, we have to advance on the quiet revolution. And this is the process that took place in United States. We don't want it to put like a role model, but it's the one on which there is much more information. And this publication from Claudia Goldwyn is extremely detailed in terms of what happened in the United States in terms of the level of participation for the 5 or 6 decades in terms of advancing this path of jobs to careers. I think independent of the sector, the concept can be applied. And it happened to be that we chose as an entry point apparel, but this can be applied to other sectors that are also trying to make a push or legal for women to stay in the job market.
Thank you for your responses. We received two questions and comments from the Professor Yoshino of the Keio University. So let me read his point. Great presentation, 2 comments. School career and job careers are 2 different points. On the job training, women can obtain skills to enhance their productivity. Is there a policy proposal to enhance skill development through job activities? And then his comment, agriculture will become an important sector in the future because of the food shortage. Job training, skill development, and technological progress, which will be friendly with women, could expand sales of agricultural product and contribute economic growth. So that's his comments. So I would like to ask speakers to make a comment or response to Professor Yoshino's point.
No, yes, and there are several good models on the job training. I mean, I am from Mexico, and I can tell you that there are several well-evaluated job training programs. Those were mainly in services, but precisely that kind of logic of the job training is the one that certain companies are applying in the case, or want to apply in the case of Bangladesh. No, how is that to be able to help women to move up into the value chain and be able to be certified manage floors, for instance. No? I mean, if they have the experience, capacity, and that's basically the essence of SIMO, is that you have certain basic competencies, then you are trained in the firm or in a firm, and then you get a certificate that will allow you to continue working there or in another firm. So certainly that knowledge can be applied there. And as Mexico said, the book has a number of examples per country of the type of education and on the job training that will be applied. And also again, I want to reiterate that this concept can be applied not only to manufacturing and apparel. This was our entry point, but it can be applied to other sectors as well. Like he's mentioned in case of agriculture, certainly, I mean, we see an increase in agriculture productivity, and it's extremely relevant. Africa, Middle East, North Africa. Certainly, that's a concept that can be applied also there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before wrapping up, I would like to ask Gladys, in order of the Gladys, Raymond, and Mexico to make the final remarks, and then we will close the seminar. So Gladys, any final remarks from you?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the questions. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to present the publication, and we encourage the audience to please take a look at our landing page, the publications, provide the comment feedbacks, because we see this as ongoing work on which we are also working with Colleagues Mexico and Raymond in a next stage in terms of thinking how to apply this concept to other sectors, and also in our work program, which is on the, as you know very well, on the distributional impacts of trade. Thank you very much for each.
Thank you. Raymond, please.
Well, thank you very much, Koichi. You did a wonderful job moderating, and I wanted to thank you very much for all of your energy, and also to all the participants for participating. We want to really encourage all of you to think about the jobs to career transition for your own research, if you're doing research or your own work, and find out how we can apply this concept to other countries and keep the discussion going. We would love to engage with you, and we appreciate the work that you do. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. Mexico, please.
Thank you, Koichi. Just a final comment, and I think, and I'm saying this because we receive a lot of questions addressing this. We focus on the apparel industry because it's the most female intensive and globally engaged of all the manufacturing industries. So we thought it was a good entry point for women to enter in the labor market. But as Gladys has mentioned, this approach on the research can be applied to different industries and sectors. So just to reiterate what Raymond mentioned, we look forward to any more questions and comments that the audience has regarding this report, because we want to stress this important difference between jobs and careers. So thank you very much for inviting us, Koichi.
Thank you. We had a pleasure of having Gladys Lopez Acevedo, Raymond Robertson, and Mexico Vergara connecting us from the Washington and the Texas to present the latest report. Thank you very much, three of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koichi.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So next week, we are going to feature the new report, Insect and Hydroponic Farming in Africa, the new circular food economy. The speaker is going to be Dorte Werner, the lead economist in agriculture and food global practice of the World Bank. This will start at 8 a.m. on Friday, January 21st in Japan Standard Time. So please join us next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.